Hello, I'm Jeff Scheidock, Dean of Students at Calvin Theological Seminary, and recently I was honored to host a conversation between Mark Braverman and Gary Burge about Israel and Palestine and about the ongoing violence in Gaza. Mark Braverman is a Jewish American with family roots in Israel. He's a retired clinical psychologist. He serves as the executive director of Kairos USA, a movement to unify and mobilize American Christians to work for a just peace in Israel and Palestine. Gary Burge is an adjunct professor of New Testament here at Calvin Theological Seminary, and he's an expert on the integration of theology and politics in the Middle East. We're all concerned about the ongoing situation in Israel and Palestine, and we wonder what we can do. In this part of their conversation, Mark and Gary offer their suggestions for how we can respond to the situation in Israel and Palestine today.
So I was being interviewed by a Presbyterian sort of a leader out in California just last week, and they said, well, where is there hope in all of this? And you and I, Mark, probably have answers for most of the things that go on. And I honestly, I felt stuck. And I said, I think we're in a dark tunnel right now. And when you're in that tunnel, I don't think any of us knows. And I don't want to fake some story of hope, but I hear despair surrounding everything right now. Do you feel that way?
Yes. It's very dark, and there's nothing good happening in this story. The only two things. One is I have been predicting for a long time that the end game, the inevitable denouement for Israel is that it's not going to work. And I don't know how much violence is going to be involved and how it's going to happen, but Israel as the Jewish state and the whole project is unsustainable. It's going to go away. In my heart, I wish for that. I wish that Israel as a Jewish state would go away, and that so that the citizens of Israel and the Palestinian people can have a hope for a decent future.
So to be clear, when you say Israel go away, you don't mean
I don't mean that they should be kicked out and thrown into the sea, which is what the Jews are.
So in other words, but the project as designed by the Zionists.
It's like South Africa. It's like the South Africans, white and black, were given a chance for a decent future.
Right.
Nobody was kicked out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's not the paradise that people expected, but apartheid itself is gone, and that's a good thing. And there's a chance for a decent future with a government that represents all the people, okay? So that's what I devoutly wish for and hope for. There are people who have been working on a one democratic state solution. This has to go away in order for that to happen. Hopefully it will go away in such a way that there's something left to build on. And I tell you, if the Palestinians and the Jews could work together to build their own country, it would be a wonder of the world. And they can get along. I know this. My grandfather played in the streets with Muslim kids in these streets of Old Jerusalem. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, in terms of what we can do, I'm casting around for answers too. The only thing that I come up with is, let's talk to our government. Let's tell—
the American government.
Yes, let's tell the White House, please stop throwing money at Israel so that they can continue this. It's going to make things worse. I don't know what is in Joe Biden's mind. I don't know what is happening with the White House telling the State Department to not talk about a ceasefire. And the State Department is in revolt about it because they know it's not in our national interest to allow Israel to keep doing what it's doing. It never has been, and we've been enabling Israel diplomatically, financially, and militarily to do what it's been doing for decades and decades and decades, and it's brought us to this. It's not in our national interest.
You'd probably say that we as Americans, and since I'm an American Christian paying taxes, we are complicit in this whole thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also call the church to accountability for this. The church leaders need to go to Washington or to, what's the capital of Michigan?
Lansing.
Yeah, go to Lansing and go to their local offices of their representatives and senators and say, stop doing this. And it has to be the leaders. It has to be your equivalent as Reformed Christians of bishops, as well as the neighborhood pastor.
Yeah.
And say, we are not with this, not as Americans and not as Christians. Stop this. It's not in our interest.
Earlier this year, I had opportunity to go to Israel, Palestine. Gary was one of the leaders of that and got to meet a lot of different people. One of the many was a Palestinian Christian. And he was lamenting, had opportunity to have dinner before he spoke, lamenting the church in the West, saying essentially, we have been waiting and we have been waiting and we can't really wait any longer for you to do something. My response to him, my question to him then was, what can I do? And he said, you have to figure that out where you are at. Yeah. I'm hearing that part of it is engaging with government officials, us as Christian leaders, so seminarians, pastors who are listening to this, others, campuses. Is that the primary thing? Are there other things we can do? I mean, you're the director of Kairos USA. Can you point us to places? Can you point us to things? Or is that the primary thing, is we need to be engaged politically on this?
Yes, we need to be engaged politically here because the United States is the major player here and have been since Harry Truman. We also need, and again, this is very important for Christians. I mean, how many tens of thousands of Christians make pilgrimages to the Holy Land every year? Right. You went with Gary. But that's not the usual pilgrimage. The usual pilgrimage is, first of all, they don't go to the West Bank because there are terrorists there and they'll kill you, right? So we stay away from the West Bank. We walk where Jesus walked, right? And we don't talk to Palestinians. And we get the whole biblical Zionist narrative that we've been talking about. So one thing you can do as a denomination, and this is happening with the other major Protestant denominations, is to mandate that if there is a pilgrimage and you're taking your congregation or your whatever, your reference group to Israel, that you work with Palestinian Christians who have tour organizations, Holy Land tour organizations, that will let you see everything. So, and I'm fond of saying, you will not only walk where Jesus walked, you will see what Jesus saw, and you will be changed as a result, and you will come back as a Christian, as an American, and do other things and become activated. That's what happened to me. It's what happened to Gary. Mark wrote a book about it.
It's crazy, Mark. I think, so I've led, as you know, quite a few trips with students, adults, mostly students. But what happens is, when pastors or others, they've done like 10 trips or 12, they're like, oh, I've been here so many times. Anyway, I had a Palestinian pastor say to me from Ramallah, he said, Gary, you haven't been here 12 or 13 times. You've been here once.
Right.
And you've basically repeated the same trip. And he said, you've been on the tourist trail.
Right, the tourist trail.
And it was so sobering and so wounding to me. And I looked at my itinerary and I thought, my goodness, this is a set tourist trail that keeps American tourists sort of on a track so they don't see things no one wants them to see, and they don't hear things they shouldn't hear. And I just remember it was a revolution. I went back and I tore up my itinerary. And I said, I want my Palestinian Christian friends to help me with my itinerary so that I can go and have people hear things they have not heard before. But that is, now compared to this kind of trip, this is going to be so sad to me. But while I, in January, was with Jeff in Israel, there was another trip that came out of Holland, Michigan. It was a trip full of pastors from West Michigan. And one of my students was on that trip. That's how I know about this. But every stop, Mark, where they stopped the bus and they got off, they all huddled around the door of the bus, and the leader led them in a chant, "Conquer the land, conquer the land." Yeah. Now, my student who had had a class with me was just so offended by this, but they kept doing it everywhere. And the driver of the bus was Palestinian. Can you imagine listening to that?
Sure.
Anyway, and my student was like, well, what do you mean? This is the most volatile thing. So there he was observing maybe 30 or more Christian pastors who are echoing what? What is that? A call from Joshua? Yeah. What is that thing? It is not only insensitive, but it is volatile. And anyway, so I hear stories like that, and it renews my resolve to do something different, something substantially different. But that's what goes on inside of the American tourist industry when it comes to Israel.
And it's time. It's all coming apart now, friends. Mm-hmm. It's all finally coming apart. I mean, Israeli society is in tatters, and it was before October 7th. You saw what was happening in the streets.
Yeah.
It's coming apart.
Yeah.
And the Palestinians are losing hope, which would be a horrible tragedy as well.
Yeah.
There's nothing good about this story right now. The only possible good thing is that people are waking up.
Right.
Amen. Well, brothers, thank you. Thank you for this conversation.
Thanks for having us.
We could talk for days.
Mm-hmm. We could.
But we have been blessed, I think, in this conversation, challenged personally, and I hope all the listeners have had some eyes open, some hearts open, and will see and act differently because of it. So thank you, brothers. Thank you for this conversation.
Thanks,
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Mark.